We have current examples, the lost boys, these teenage males expelled from the Warren Jeffs community. I think Andrea Radke mentioned them. Well, these are not Mormons, you say, and Jeffs is no Latter-day Saint. Oh, yes, but they show the cruelty, the superstition, and the authoritarianism within the Latter-day Saint movement. I shudder to think what the Mark hacking story might do to the reputation of the church. If he's not typical, you see what belief in Mormonism can lead to. Now, I do not have a testimony of the history of the church. In making this declaration, I have no need to deny that our church history is peopled with many inspiring individuals. What they preached and what they studied and what they taught can be studied. While enhancing my historical understanding, I often find reinforcement for my faith. But I uncouple the two, testimony and history. Thankfully, testimony is not dependent on scholars. I leave ample room for human perversity. I am not wed to any single, simple version of the past. I leave room for new information and new interpretations. My testimony in the eternal gospel does not hang in the balance. One thing such a distinction does for me is to disencumber me from a crippling sense of the kind of history I must write. I can tell it as it is. More precisely, since none of us believe in completely objective reporting, I can give my best effort at presenting what I find. I don't have to be running scared all the time, fearful that I may something or quote something that will shake up poor little sister Blavatsky or new convert brother Campanella. I won't take delight in affronting them, but I should be able to study my subject and give my best effort to understanding the personalities and the events. So I studied the colonization of the Little Colorado in 1876. What a terrible assignment that was. Leader of the colonists was Lot Smith, a veteran of the Utah War. Tough and strong in his leadership, Lot Smith did not please everyone. He was no namby-pamby. But my history reports what I discovered, trying to be fair to all. For you see, I don't have a history. I don't have a testimony of the history of the church. I studied marriage among the Mormons in the second half of the 19th century. Was there more polygamy than I had been led to believe? We heard some percentages a while ago. So be it. I report what the best evidence supports. Were there more than a few examples of unhappy plural wives and more divorces than we had realized? So be it. I report what I find. I don't lean all the way in the other direction, mind you, but I report what I find. For I don't have a testimony of the history of the church. Did many of Joseph Smith's, moving backward in time, did many of Joseph Smith's neighbors sign affidavits describing him in unfavorable terms? Well, so be it. I report that fact. In order properly to evaluate these, I consider the agenda of the man who gathered them, compiled them, and often wrote them for the signature of people. I certainly weigh into the balance the testimony of others who describe Joseph in very different terms, but we're trying to get at the truth here, or as close to it as we can. I don't have a testimony of the history of the church. What kind of history do we need? I think we're on the home stretch here. What kind of history do we need? For practically all the questions that seem to trouble people or that are used in an effort to dislodge members from their faith, satisfactory answers are available. Answers are there for the sincere truth seeker. Without naming names for fear of leaving someone out, I think it is obvious that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has a number of ready and highly skilled defenders, some of them in this room. I commend the members of this organization as well as others who have entered the fray. In many instances, the answers they provide are decisive, leaving the critic with no leg to stand on. There is always work to do, new questions, and some that require answers more profound than the initial defenders have come up with. But obviously, we are not tongue-tied and helpless. The hope of the detractors, of course, is that they will reach with their jaundiced version people who are unaware of what the defenders have already made available. And sadly, when much of our population is made up of non-readers, a well-placed fiery dart of the adversary might be fatal. When I was in graduate school, one of our seminars included a unit on the Counter-Reformation, or the Catholic Reformation, as it's sometimes called, of the 16th century. For over 30 years of university teaching, I have introduced undergraduate and graduate students to this subject. My own understanding of the Catholic Reformation of the 16th century moved up by a series of steps. First, I knew some treatments of the subject in Latter-day Saint lesson manuals. That was when I was pre-university. Then as an undergraduate, I had deepened my factual knowledge by reading a reasonably good chapter in a standard textbook. The Counter-Reformation was pretty much depicted as a belated response to the Protestant challenge. Some of the manifestations, the rise of the Jesuit order, the Council of Trent, even the lamentable massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve in France, could easily be interpreted as further evidence of the corruption of Roman Catholicism. The popes are often presented as the bad guys of Christian history. As a teenager, I had been introduced to this negative view of the popes. I knew a few names like Innocent III and the infamous Alexander VI, but I understood very little. On the graduate level, you simply don't get away with the textbook level of understanding. I took it upon myself to read Leopold von Ranke's 3-volume history of the popes. On one level, it was an instructive example of the use of newly available primary sources, such as the Relazioni of the Venetian ambassadors. As I read through this work, I thought, maybe things are not quite as simple as I thought. Above all, I remember reading Ludwig von Pastor's History of the Popes, multi-volume work in about 20 volumes. Product of a lifetime of research and writing in German and then translated into English, Pastor's History of the Popes was a real eye-opener. I will not make the mistake of describing this work as objective. What Pastor does is to use the internal church documents to describe in detail the successive challenges confronted by the popes, the reports and documents they had to go on, the urging of different advisors, sometimes the false starts and the backtracking of papal policy. Studied in this way, the popes simply cannot be credibly portrayed in the cartoon-like terms of their adversaries. Some popes were good, some were bad, most were somewhere in between. Most were doing the best they could under the circumstances. The closer one gets to their minds through a careful scrutiny of the documents that were available to them and the letters and speeches that came from them, the less one is inclined to defame them in simple terms. I don't recommend Pastor as the last word on the subject, but his great history is still instructive, and it must be known by anyone presuming to treat the subject of the Catholic popes. Some of you have already anticipated my conclusion. This is the kind of history, or at least one kind of history, not the only kind, but one kind of history we need in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Speaking from a background of reading many diaries and minutes of meetings, as well as letters and reports on which decisions were based, I can confidently say that such history, in addition to being closer to the reality of the actual experience, enhances appreciation for the dedicated, sincere men and women who made decisions and moved the work along.